Welcome to the Sensory Empower podcast. I'm Bethany, your host. I'm a holistic occupational therapist with over a decade of experience in supporting individuals helping to transform their world through sensory empowerment. This podcast is your guide to the transformative world of sensory storytelling, holistic tools, and empowerment strategies. I love the idea of sensory empowerment. That's why I've created and built my business, Sensory Empower. So a little bit more about me. My name is Bethany. I'm an occupational therapist, trained in a lot of really cool holistic strategies and holistic tools. Got about a decade of being an OT and supporting individuals and families and coming up with some really powerful sensory strategies to help everyone feel empowered through their senses. I just got my Safe and Sound Protocol certification, and so I'm now an official provider of the SSP. And this is a very wonderful listening program that's very therapeutic. So this is very polyvagal theory based. This is a very powerful program for nervous system regulation, auditory processing, and supporting auditory sensitivities. In my learnings and pulling all sorts of really fun strategies and holistic tools to help my sensory needs, I've also come across and have become certified in EFT tapping, which is emotional freedom technique, as well as breath work and the power of breath work for vagal toning. What happens in our body when we're experiencing sensations? So we'll kind of start here at the brain. We're thinking about how our brain is interpreting the things that are happening in our world, and then how things shift with either movement or sensory. So we've got the motor neuron. So we've got the stimulus of something hot. The brain then receives this feedback from the receptors of our hand, so tactile input, temperature input. It then sends that signal to our brain for the motor movement to allow for something to happen. It's hot. Let me move my hand. So we have that response of the muscle that goes through, gives us feedback to our brain, but is reflexively coming from our spinal cord. We've got lots of protective mechanisms. The really important thing, and the why I kind of show this, is the motor responses can be misinterpreted from things in our environment that might be presenting as danger or noxious stimuli, perceived danger, but not actually true danger. And so this is just kind of a like, if we have pulled away or have had a startle response, a lot of times this motor neuron component is overreacting and maybe misinterpreting things that are happening in our world. A lot of times in the world of sensory overwhelm and sensory sensitivities, this can be a really crucial piece to kind of consider about how our body is just trying to come from a protective. It's just trying to protect us. But there are times where we might have some motor movements that pop up of either retreating or moving away. We might, push something away if we're getting really overstimulated. So that's kind of that concept of how we interpret. And it's a lot of these things are happening at the brainstem level, at that spinal cord level, where it's just reflexive. It goes in, it's a moment of self-preservation. Our system needs to respond quickly in the thought of danger. Again, it's always that perception of danger, but is it truly dangerous? Our system can sometimes misinterpret when we're already at a moment of feeling overwhelmed, overstimulated, or have moved fully into sensory overload. So when we think about the sensory neuron, we've got this separate pathway that kind of kicks in, and we're thinking about things such as this message and the filtering. So we are receiving a message from our senses, maybe in this case it is tactile, and it's filtering and processing in our brain. And again, along with that motor output, we can also have a misinterpretation of the sensory input. I always think this is a perfect example. I've worked with a few clients who just get so overwhelmed with touch and different textures. I think a microfiber cloth is one that gets brought up quite a bit from tactile, that it feels just like touching a cat's tongue, or it feels like sandpaper on my skin. And I can't use a microfiber cloth because it is just like sticking to me and it makes me want to throw it. So that we've got the motor response, but we also have a possible misinterpretation that this isn't a dangerous thing. It is perceiving to our body, maybe though, that it is so uncomfortable that it's being perceived as a noxious stimuli. So it may be just getting filtered and processed a little bit more differently than other brains. So let's kind of go through, what can we do? What are some things we can keep in mind? Going through some strategies to help us with processing and feeling more empowered through our senses. So the power of smell. I always bring up scent as a power tool because it can override some energy very quickly. So there's even just like smelling the flowers, being outside and smelling the earth. If it rains, those are some of my favorite things. I live in Oregon and we have a lot of rain. And so even just opening up the window a little bit and using the shift of just a different smell. When we think about lighting different candles or using essential oils, there are many moments where our system so powerfully connects with scent, and memory and scent are very, very powerful connection. So that can go some different ways. I've worked with some individuals who experience the facets of trauma and memory. If that is a traumatic event and a specific smell that occurred or that was perceived and interpreted during that traumatic event, those can be moments where we're considering, that might be a trigger in the future because the smell in that heightened moment made a very core or traumatic memory in those moments. So smell, memory connected together in more of an intense way, but also in a very positive way. We can use the power of smell and the power of memory. So maybe sometimes there's, a specific type of lotion or a specific baked good or something that you've really enjoyed, a specific flower, something like that. And your brain may already be popping up a memory because it's so, in such a cool way, connected scent and memory. It can pop up this really lovely memory and bring in maybe a feeling of joy or gratitude, or awe of, wow, I smell this and I remember, being with my grandma when I was like 8 years old. And I remember this vivid memory based off of this specific scent. So, how can we use this for support? Well, if we're having an intensity, more of a response to more of a negative experience with smell, are there times where we can, if we are experiencing dysregulation because of the scent, utilize some grounding activities and recognize that this smell does not equal the negative experience currently happening? And that thought process of even thinking about your thinking, grounding into your body, maybe giving yourself a big squeeze to kind of reset and hone in and really try to focus on, if you're, if you're able to in that moment, is this something that is a safe smell? Right now, I am safe. My body is not being harmed. I am protected. And this smell is just a link to a memory that was not a very good experience. And so it allows our brain to kind of interpret and gauge a little bit more with the concrete, the realization of, is this truth or is this a experience that from the past that's coming back up? So is this the lived experience currently in the present moment, or is this smell memory coming up from something in my past that maybe was a little bit more uncomfortable? And I think just this piece of awareness, especially with scent, because it can be so connected with memory, good or bad, right? Or neutral, just keeping this in mind and giving a lot of grace. And, maybe when the time is right to explore some different smells and maybe find some smells that you really, really enjoy. Maybe there's a specific flower that you really love and you go and you receive, something in your garden and you go plant this specific flower that you really like. So you have that smell around. Maybe you can have those mindfulness in nature moments to go find a specific tree that you really, really love as it's blooming. Possibly there are specific essential oils or maybe certain spices that you really gravitate to. I know I'm more of a sensory seeker, especially when it comes to smell and taste. And so a lot of times I'll use like cinnamon. I'll put cinnamon in my coffee. I really like chai. So again, that kind of clove cinnamon flavor and scent. And I'll just like and take just a big deep breath in through my nose and just think about how that smell is impacting my regulation level in that moment. And even using it to kind of shift if I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, I use that as a very lovely tool. So, the power of smell, a very robust and a very lovely thing to consider. The power of weight. We can use all sorts of different things. We might have animals in our lives that help provide some deep pressure, and using weight might be an option of maybe heavy blankets. So putting a couple extra blankets on your bed. Temperature regulation is always a consideration there. So keeping in mind, if you are a system that sometimes gets too hot, that might be one to kind of keep in mind. That maybe not an excess amount of blankets, but maybe something like a weighted blanket might be really helpful. I think I have frequently gravitated to using a weighted blanket kind of on my, lower half, my legs. And then I just kind of have it a little bit lighter up near my arms and my chest. Some other things to keep in mind and consider with the power of weight is how we can use anything in our home. So if there is weights that you actually lift, is that something that regulates your system? Are there certain jackets that maybe have a little bit heavy material that give that kind of deep compression feeling of the weight on your shoulders? Is that something that would be comfortable for you, or would that be uncomfortable for your system? And this is just, these are all ideas of just kind of trial and error and considerations. Maybe your system is like, nope, I feel like I'm going to be trapped or overwhelmed. That's been some feedback I've received from some clients, is the feeling of overwhelm with being squished or squeezed. And then other clients do really, really well having that deep pressure squeeze, that deep pressure pull. Having a weighted blanket is something that's really supportive for regulation and for promoting sleep. So it's up to you and your nervous system. So again, these are just ideas of considerations that might be cool to think about and possibly trial. The power of EFT tapping. So emotional freedom technique is so cool. So as we kind of think about opening up blockages and we're releasing things from our body, we can release the feeling of sensory overwhelm and sensory sensitivities. We can release this energetic feeling from our body in a really cool way through tapping. So, EFT tapping is opening up meridian channels along the center part of our body, and it really helps to move through extra energy, and it helps to release things that might be stuck. So you might be stuck in more of that heightened arousal state, feeling overwhelmed or dysregulated. And this is a consideration to keep in mind, that EFT tapping can be such a powerful tool. So I will share a little bit more about how you can practice some of this in guidance from me and how I've kind of shifted EFT tapping strategies to use I am affirmation statements, and how we can tie those into releasing specific things like the feeling of sensory overwhelm. I love nature. So, the next thing I really want to share about how we can feel empowered through our senses is using the power of mindfulness in nature. So, considering the idea of mindfulness in nature, I think about going down a path, maybe looking at the trees, looking at the different textures. I'm using my vision. I'm moving down the path and I'm taking a big breath in through my nose. I'm implementing breath work, but I'm also using this power of smell again. I am hearing the different animals. Maybe there's birds chirping and maybe the rustling of the leaves with the wind. And there's a lot of tactile or touch opportunities in nature. There's lots of different things that we can notice. There might be different temperatures, there might be different textures, there might be different sensations that our hands or even our feet can experience when we're thinking about the power of mindfulness in nature. The power of nature in general can be very supportive for regulation. And so these are things to consider as an opportunity just to take a 5 to 10 minute nature loop. There's a space near your home where you're able to step outside, just stepping on your porch or stepping outside in front of your home, looking up into a tree, looking up into the sky, noticing any birds that are flying, any birds that are chirping, and maybe considering the idea of breath work along with being in nature and how breathing in a calm way can be very powerful as we're kind of looking around and just receiving. We're receiving so much beautiful input, but very grounding input from our body when we are out and immersed in nature. The power of auditory tools. So, what are our hearing tools that we can use? We can think about listening to our favorite music. We can think about things like headphones or loop earplugs that can help damper if the sound is too loud. We can think about listening to sound healing or Hertz music. We can think about setting up our favorite playlists and getting some dancing out and having some extra movement through the power of music. And we can consider areas where we might benefit from having an ear break. So that might be in a moment where there's an assembly or a conference or a music festival, and having just a little bit of a retreat space for your ears. And you can take the retreat space there by having something that just dampers, like headphones. So this is just an idea of things that we can use as auditory or our ear tools that can be helpful to feel empowered through your senses. And then breath work. So many fun things that we can do with breath work. Breath work is the idea of focusing on belly breathing or using different breathing techniques that are going to help move your system into a state of calm and that rest and digest system called parasympathetic. And so when we move into a parasympathetic nervous system, we're really considering the power of vagal toning. Every time we take a big belly breath, we're nourishing this beautiful vagal nerve. Our 10th cranial nerve is a very, very powerful nerve. And so the power of breath helps to activate that nerve to do what it does best, which is relaxation. And so the power of breath work in nature, we can grab a dandelion and take a big deep breath and blow the dandelion seeds. We can use different techniques that might be silly, like a breathing ball or a breathing scarf. We can just practice having our hand on our belly, maybe a hand on heart and a hand on belly, and just noticing these full, expansive belly breathing as your hand extends with a full inhale and then releases with a full exhale. As a consideration, when your system is starting to move more into a heightened state, the power of pause and the power of pause and breathing can be a game changer with that reset moment. I'm noticing in my heart that my heart rate is starting to beat a little bit faster. This beautiful interoceptive awareness is telling me that my system is starting to get overwhelmed. What can I do? I have the power of taking deeper breaths. That is something innate in our system that we don't need any other tools, that we can use at a beautiful nervous system calming level. At any point, we can recruit that tool. It's a very powerful one. And then the power of heavy work. So heavy work helps with our proprioception. So this is our body awareness sense. This allows us to figure out how much power to use with different tasks. And it can be very, very grounding if we're feeling overstimulated. So push-ups and yoga, isometric workouts, wall push-ups, chair push-ups, squeezing hands, maybe pressing hands together, sitting on hands. All of those can be very powerful, heavy work activities. In addition, you might be also receiving them throughout your daily tasks. So if you're making a smoothie and you're pushing down the smoothie top of the blender, if you are vacuuming or sweeping, if you are lifting and carrying things, rearranging furniture, all of those are very functional daily tasks. You might not be moving furniture every day, of course, but the idea of how we can use the power of heavy work as a regulation tool sends this beautiful signal to our brain, letting us know where our body is in space, as well as how much power to use. Proprioception through heavy work can be very, very powerful to help with nervous system regulation, providing additional feedback to our body, and be very, very grounding for our nervous system. So I'm so excited to talk about how can you get a little bit more information? How can we start to learn a little bit more on tools with sensory empowerment? And so I have a lovely membership program. We meet monthly on Zoom on Thursdays, and I have just really, really enjoyed leading sensory self care. So, sensory self care is a very powerful membership community, and we talk about sensory processing. We talk about sensory empowerment strategies. We always review some sort of breath work or movement. There's always an opportunity to review the EFT tapping along with a really cool script. And so these are things to consider if you are seeking a little bit more additional support. So here's what some of our learners have been sharing. I'm feeling so much more engaged with using these tools I've learned in sensory self-care and doing it with community. So the power of community. I notice myself recruiting these tools with much more ease now. Building in of these are just routines. These are tools that can be very powerful, set in as a routine where it's just easier to use these tools, easier to feel empowered through your senses. Another member explains that these are group calls that are really perfect reminders to pause, slow down, and review and dig into those toolbox activities. So if this is something that is a calling to you, I highly recommend joining. There is a very powerful community building all about supporting each other. We're talking a lot about how we process sensations, and there's a huge list of library resources where you can go quickly to find a 4-minute, 5-minute breathwork, meditation, EFT tapping, or a quick review of some of the things that we've talked about. And so as I invite an opportunity, I have set up a coupon code for you to try the first month at 50% off by using the code. And this can be a very, very powerful opportunity for us to collaborate together, share in community, and be able to hold space for each other as we all start to grow, learn, and empowered through our senses. And I wish you a beautiful day. Thank you for joining me on this sensory adventure through Sensory Empower, the podcast. Remember, empowerment begins with awakening your senses. Subscribe now and embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Until next time, may your senses guide you towards a life filled with peace, joy, and empowerment. Because true empowerment begins with embracing your senses.